I don't want to be here. Can I go back? It's even got that fucking sad music that I played all the time during the Amine flashback. I don't want this. The summer sun scorched the ground beneath our feet. In the heart of the ancient capital, we walked uphill, following the road away from the station's eastern exit. I was talking, casually, of trivial things. Oh, it's so far back. It's baby Yumiko. Looking up at the person holding my hand, I smiled. Alright. In contrast to my cheerful chattering, the woman walking at my side had a clouded expression on her face. Her profile was beautiful, but cold, almost like that of a marble statue. Oh, isn't that just nice, isn't it, Yumiko? Alright, well. The same words repeated in the same tone, as if she played a back recording. Not understanding what that signified, I continued to speak. That trivial little event must have made me very happy, because I just kept on talking. Sentences flowed into sentence with barely a pause for breath in between. Matching the rhythm of my skipping steps, I pattered on faster and faster, filled with innocent excitement. Oh no. First her feet came to a stop, and without turning to look at me, her face still in profile, my mother finally answered. Alright, I'll shut up now, I guess. Her quiet voice emerged only to melt away into the squawking of the cicadas. Two pleasures, the skipping and the conversation, abruptly taken from me. I hesitated uncertainly, not certain where to direct my gaze. But soon I found a clear path forward, and my hesitation gave way to a reply. It was the phrase, "I'm sorry." How many times have I spoken those words by then? Even when I'd done nothing wrong, even when I'd done nothing at all, those words offered an escape, or an exit from any uncomfortable moment. And above all else, they lightened the burden on my mother's heart. Oh, it's another girl who uses "I'm sorry" a lot, huh? Mumbling those words had always been the best that I could do at times like those. And my mother, in turn, offered me the same soft words of apology. In retrospect, it might very well have been her fault that I developed a habit of relying on the words "I'm sorry." She spoke the phrase so frequently, it was probably only natural that I began to imitate her. A cold profile, a rigid face, locked in position, never turning to me. Speaking a few words with nothing but a slight movement of her lips, my mother began to walk once more. Her strides even smaller than usual. With a nod, I stepped forward at my mother's side, slipping halfway into the shadow cast by her parasol. As the shades swayed with her steps, the blazing sun flickered before my eyes like a movie shot on cheap film. We walked in silence through the midsummer heat, surrounded by the voices of cicadas. I squeezed my mother's hand tightly, very tightly, as if that connection was the only thing in the world I could rely on. Oh, my mother, Misako, was born into the Kawamoto family, owners of a real estate business in the ancient city of Kamakura. After graduating from university, she accepted an arranged marriage to my father, Sakaki Michikai. God damn it. Michiaki, there we go. I knew it. She was 25 years old. The Kawamoto were small-time landowners, and their business had fallen into financial problems when their only daughter married the young president of East Beach Railways, a company that had taken complete control of the regional railroad network. The Kawamoto family treated it as a miracle, comparable to winning the lottery. Just the same age. Look at him.
あなた、お食事は？
もう済ませた。いつものことを毎度毎度聞くんじゃない。着替えは？
Ugh, this is a no-love family already.
はい、用意してあります。
Well, because, you know, circumstances.
すぐに支度する。30分後に出るから玄関に出して小島に渡しておいてくれ。
Uh-huh.
はい。
Uh-huh. He doesn't give a shit. Fuck him. Doesn't even say. Doesn't even. My father was a complete workaholic with more than one house to return to. He only came to see us once a week and never stayed longer than an hour. At that point, I hadn't so much as held a conversation with him. All I could remember were brief moments of eye contact in the hallway when we passed by each other. He didn't even say anything to Yumiko. He didn't even say, "Hi, sweetie." Like, no, nothing. Just, where's my change of clothes? I'm leaving. Like, fuck you. I can still remember the way he looked at me. There was no emotion in his gaze. Not even contempt. Almost as if he didn't realize something was there. His eyes were frighteningly empty. My room in that house was pointlessly large. Spacious as it was, it hadn't been made for a child to live in. The bed and closet were both adult-sized. For the most part, it looked like nothing more than just another guest room. A child's desk, a haphazardly purchased assortment of stuffed animals and toys. These were the only objects that suggested otherwise, and they felt deeply out of place.
どんな挨拶をしたらお父さん返事してくれるのかな？
Nothing. I stood in front of the mirror, practicing many different facial expressions, earnestly thinking over a problem with no solution.
どんな顔をしたらお父さんは帰ってきてくれるのかな？
None, actually. That's what I'm getting out of this. Alone in a room far too large for me, I thought about the stone-faced father I barely knew. How could I catch his attention? How could I make him realize I was even there?
おはようございます。おはようございます。おはようございます。
Oh, poor baby Yumiko's trying.
違うのかな？どうなのかな？おはようございます。おはようございます。おはようございます。
Within that staid and conservative railroad family, a daughter bore little weight. My mother's marriage had seemed a blessing for the Kawamoto family, but when she gave birth to me, it quickly became an uncomfortable topic. Her job had been to give birth to an heir to inherit the East Beach Empire. Instead, she had produced a daughter, at best a potential tool for political marriage. No one was to blame for that, but it was still a deep disappointment to those around her. Fuck, man, I hate this guy. And my father had treated his new wife very kindly at first, but after I came into the world and he learned that my mother was too physically frail to endure many pregnancies, he became noticeably brusque and distant. That transformation must have hurt my mother deeply. After it began, she grew gradually weaker in body and spirit until finally she could no longer manage to take care of my father's personal needs. My mother returned to her parents when I was 6 years old. Oh, she had endured as best she could, desperate not to leave a bad impression on my father's family. But my mother was fundamentally a sheltered and fragile woman. Did I say fragile? You know? Putting aside her physical condition, her mind had been worn down to the point where she could no longer cope. I understand. And so one hot midsummer day, she gathered our luggage, took my hand, and left the Sakaki house. Oh shit, man.
Ah, おかえり。
おかえりなさい。
Yeah, it wasn't a joyous homecoming for anyone involved. After an exchange of indescribably uncomfortable greetings, they began an equally awkward conversation.
美佐子、体の具合は？
Dead inside.
大丈夫です。何もありません。
それならしっかり治して道明さんのためにも早く戻ってあげないとね。
Yeah, Sure. Uh-huh.
はい。
It was obvious at a glance that my mother couldn't possibly go back anytime soon. Still, my pragmatic grandparents wanted their daughter back with the Skaki family before the wound of separation grew too deep. My mother may have wanted to return herself, even knowing that she could no longer be capable of enduring that life. There was a slight edge of frustration in her voice as she vaguely affirmed my grandparents' words.
お母さん。
They left me out of the conversation so completely that I began to feel invisible. In the end, I couldn't help but call out. When I spoke, my mother's hand twitched around mine, as if only just realizing she'd been pulling me along at her side. As if she'd been trying to forget an unpleasant reality by averting her eyes from it.
由美子、おじいちゃんとおばあちゃんにご挨拶なさい。
Still not looking in my direction, my mother muttered those words quietly.
おじいちゃん、おばあちゃん、こんにちは。
So you pretty much... I tried to get out the greeting I had practiced for Dad on my grandparents.
ああ、こんにちは。
こんにちは。
Their response were stiff and awkward. They didn't so much as smile at me. Literally no love. So it had already been decided that my mother would be hospitalized. Originally, the doctors had recommended admitting her to a psychiatric ward, but a return home under the cloud of a separation would no doubt become the subject of gossip in the area. Who knew what people would say about a mental illness on top of it all? Instead, Mom returned home under the superficial cover of poor health and entered a general hospital. My grandparents had been busy enough with their struggling business. Now they had new burdens on their hands, and they made no attempt to hide their exhaustion. The complaining began on the very first day.
かわいそうに。生まれたのが女の子じゃなかったら、美佐子もこんな。
Yup. There's, See, that's why this is why Yumiko is the way she is, because she feels like she shouldn't have ever been born. Oof.
おい、やめないか。
だってあなただっておっしゃってたじゃありませんか。せっかくの機会だったのに台無しになってしまったって。
それはそうだが。
だから女の子だって分かった時にお医者様に強く言ってでもやり直しをすればよかったのですよ。
美佐子の体が持たないことはお前も分かっていたじゃないか。
でも
She could only handle the one pregnancy, man. It was a one-shot deal. You got a beautiful, lovely daughter out of it. Come on. I get it. She's not... God, I hate everyone in this fucking route already. I hate them. Hate all of them. Fuck them. I'm so salty right now. During the years I spent living with my mother's family, my grandparents never showed me anything like affection. In retrospect, I was an unwanted burden, a symbol of failure. I suppose they hardly had any reason to welcome me, but even so, it was a form of cruelty.
美佐子も入院するし、由美子を学校に通わせないといけないし、どうしたらいいんだか。
The fuck you want? I need education too.
榊の家からは生活費も出ているのだから、それでいいじゃないか。
よくありませんわよ。会社の方が当座の資金にも苦しい状況なのに、あなたどうしてそんなにのんきなことを言っていられるんですか。
おい、そんな言い方はないだろう。
The two of them seemed to quarrel virtually every minute of every day, right until I left the house. They were considerate enough to not to behave this way around my mother, but their unwanted grandchild was a different story. Raw emotions flew back and forth as if I wasn't even
お
there.
犬さん、可愛かったな。
When I was inside the house, I couldn't help hearing unpleasant conversations. It was a small mercy that we had one of the spacious gardens so typical in country towns. I'd always slip out there when I saw my grandparents talking with serious expressions on their face. I passed the time scratching on the ground with tree branches. Those scribbles in the dirt became an escape, a portal to a vague, faraway world.
いつお家に帰るのかな。
Recalling what I'd seen through the window that day, I moved the point of my branch through the soil. Recalling my few happy memories, I drew them out one by one, over and over, hoping to make them even slightly more vivid in my mind. My drawing improved quickly in pursuit of a clear and unmistakable exit from reality. I want to go back already. I'm getting triggered and upset. Like, actually upset. I carefully combed my shoulder-length hair and tied it back with a rubber band. I hadn't particularly been trying to grow it out, but once I understood that haircuts cost money, I'd simply allow things to take their own course, and that's why I cut my own hair, 'cause haircuts cost money. It's okay, I'm actually pretty decent at cutting my own hair, believe it or not. Not to imply that my grandparents were keeping me in rags. They were far too vain for that. I always had the minimum necessary to look respectable. But ever since I'd grown old enough to understand my position, it was difficult to muster the slightest interest in fashion. I opted for plain, dark clothes. The more inconspicuous, the better. My hair fell straight to the shoulder in the simplest possible style. As a child, I wanted nothing more than to be noticed, but at some point, I began to seek refuge in my own anonymity. It seemed safer to be
行っ
ignored.
てきます。
Pausing under the weathered eaves, I offered a farewell to no one in particular, then walked off alone. I had grown tall. I was wearing a middle school uniform now. Nobody had commented on either fact. Ever since arriving at that place, I had been alone. There were always people in the house, but I was alone.
由美子嬢ちゃん、今日のお弁当ですよ。
Oh, lunch! The best time of the day, Yumiko.
ありがとう、トシエさん。
As I left the house, I found Toshi-san waiting outside. Toshi-san was an old woman who had looked after my grandparents' family for many years as their housekeeper. Even when the business fell in hard times and could no longer afford the expense, she stayed in the house next door, taking care of us without any compensation. I wasn't her employer, but she always called me Miss in a kindly tone of voice. Fucking someone who's actually nice to us. She was the only person in my life who showed me real affection, yup.
制服、なんだか恥ずかしいな。何を言いますか。嬢ちゃん、よう似合ってますよ。
Can I live with Miss Toshi? Fuck these other people.
ありがとう。そんなこと言ってくれるの、トシエさんだけよ。嬢ちゃん。
God, that is a depressing sentence right there.
それじゃあ、行ってきます。
Oh god. I didn't talk with anyone at middle school. Or rather, I couldn't. It was an insular place where relationships had long since been firmly established, often mirroring the connections between parents. Someone abruptly wedged in from the outside had very little hope of fitting in. Much less for a quiet girl who had moved out to the country under circumstances like mine. None of the other children were friendly to me. I knew they talked about me behind my back. Fuck them too! God damn it! But after the years I'd spent alone with my grandparents, I suppose I'd grown used to such casual disdain. My student life didn't feel particularly painful. It was merely empty. I filled the vast stretches of empty time by drawing pictures. It was a habit I'd picked up as a means of escaping into fantasy, but as I came to accept reality, the images changed gradually into simple landscapes. Not to say that I was viewing things more positively now. I'd simply just grown numb. The contents of my drawings mattered less to me than the time I could kill moving pencil over paper. I no longer looked for meaning in the art itself. My grandfather had a pile of empty sketchbooks, abandoned from the days when he had time to pursue his hobbies. I made a rare request and took them as my own. Day in and day out, I filled their pages with dull landscapes. With mechanical movements, I drew hollow images of the hollow world. When school ended, I would make my way over to the hospital where my mother was staying. The hospital was further from my grandparents' house than my middle school. To reach it, I had to walk a good 2 kilometers, first descending a slope and then climbing back up. I didn't have a bike, and asking for bus fare would have been unpleasant, so I always traveled that road on foot. Of course, it wasn't pleasant, but I developed an obstinate streak in my own right. That hike had become a part of my daily routine. Get those leg
あ
muscles.
ら、榊さん。こんにちは。
A familiar nurse called out to me as I walked down a familiar hallway.
こんにちは。今日はお母さん、朝から具合もいいみたいよ。ご飯もちゃんと食べてるし。
Well, I suppose that's good.
そうですか。こうやって榊さんが毎日お見舞いに来てくれるからね。きっと。
I don't know if that's the case.
そんなことは。
In fact, I'll say it's totally not that at all. Equivocating with a weak smile, I nodded to the nurse and walked away. My mother's condition was always seesawing from improvement to setback. It wasn't the sort of disease that could be cured with some wonder drug, and in Mother's case, the doctors didn't entirely understand the cause of her illness, or even the reason she wasn't healing. There was no clear path to complete recovery. By that point, I understood that my existence had a great deal to do with her sickness. My visits couldn't possibly have been helping her. It was probably just the opposite. Yeah. I walked rapidly toward room 301 in the A ward. There was a part of me that thought those visits were pointless, but without them I would have lost the only thing I had left, my origins. Even as I isolated myself behind an inconspicuous appearance, in that one place I desperately sought some kind of connection.
お母さん。
Oh god. My mother had been given a private room. The hospital's administrator was an old acquaintance of my grandfather, so it had been arranged at a considerable discount. Or so our gossipy neighbors believed. It was a pure white room, largely empty except for the plain medical bed standing by the window. My mother passed her days lying there. There was no medical reason she couldn't go out, but she never tried.
ユミコ。今日も来てくれたのね。
Why are you even here? Oh. My mother greeted me with the most convincing smile she could force onto her face. But that face didn't turn toward me.
今日は具合がいいってさっき看護師さんが。
Setting up a folding chair at her bedside, I began to speak. Her physician had asked me to fill the visits with conversation. Even the silliest little things will do, so just keep talking to her, please.
ご飯もちゃんと食べられてよかったね。
But I filled every moment with silly chat for a different reason entirely.
そう。それでね。
The conversation was almost entirely one-sided. My mother's responses were mostly monosyllabic. It was difficult to tell if she was even listening. Even so, I continued to chatter away.
今日もいい天気だね。
Oh, Yumiko, you're bringing up the nice weather. Eventually, I ran out of things to talk about and changed the topic to the weather out of desperation. But by then, even the monosyllabic responses had trickled to a halt. Wow. Fuck you too, I guess. Time flowed by in silence. 1 minute of stillness. 3, 5. Finally, my mother slowly opened her mouth to speak. Even before the words came, my body twitched in alarm.
ごめんね。本当に。お母さん、こんな。そんなこと。
When my mother spoke to me, it was always to deliver an apology. That was why I babbled away so persistently. I didn't want to give her a chance to speak.
今日はもう帰るね。そう。
Folding the chair with a few practice movements, I leaned it against the wall, the small shelf on the wall.
それじゃあまた明日。
What is our life? I came to this place in search of connection, and every day I went home with nothing but disappointment. To be honest, those visits were painful for me. Sometimes I thought about how much nicer it would be just to stop coming entirely. But without my faint connection to my mother, I would be adrift in a sea of nothingness. I had no choice but to hold stubbornly on to that single lifeline. I wasn't under any illusions that my conversations with Mom were doing her any good. In fact, her physician had begun to indirectly allude otherwise. Something along the lines of, "You don't have to come every single day, dear." Ugh. But I was afraid. What if my mother did recover? If I abandoned her now, she might not take me home with her when she returned to our old home. I didn't have many pleasant memories of that place, but at least I was something other than an object of scorn. At least there I had something like an identity, and I couldn't return unless my mother took me with her. Unless you call up dear old dad, who also is an asshole. Oh my god. I hated myself for those selfish thoughts, but I didn't stop visiting. Pushing everything that had brought us to there out of my mind, I clung stubbornly to the childish hope of a happy ending waiting around the corner. Maybe. We'll see. We might get a bad end for this. The first year of my middle school life flowed by aimlessly. The only thing I had gained in the time was a bit of textbook knowledge. Apart from that, I hadn't learned a thing. I'm fairly sure my grades were good. I didn't want to give anyone the chance to criticize me on that front. Becoming a difficult child would be too risky. My place in the world was tenuous enough as it is. Thinking back on it now, I might have just been happier just running away. But having spent my entire life shut up inside a box, the idea of trying to escape didn't even occur to me. From just one year ago, I said goodbye to no one in particular and left the house alone. Nothing had changed. The scenery was the same, and my life was the same. Everything in that country town was static.
奥様と旦那様を恨まないでやってくださいな。元はとてもお優しい方だったんですよ。
Yeah, originally. Are they now? No, fuck them. That morning, when Toshi-san handed me my lunchbox, I found myself grumbling a few rare complaints about my situation. The targets were mainly my grandparents. We'd been living together for many years now, and still they only spoke to me when it was absolutely necessary. Every moment I spent in that house made me feel as if I was slowly suffocating.
だけど、おじいちゃんもおばあちゃんもまるで私がいないかのような態度を取るんだもの。
It's true. It's true. Fuck them.
貧すれば心も鈍する。今は由美子嬢ちゃんに構って差し上げられる余裕がないんですよ。家業の具合がようなれば、それも変わってくると思いますからの。
Yeah, because I'm gonna believe that for fucking 1 minute. Ugh.
そうなのかしら。
Yep, Yumiko already knows.
由美子嬢ちゃんはこんなにいい子なんですから、いつかきっとちゃんと見てくださいますよ。
I've been
それ
dealing...
まではこのババで我慢してくださいな。
Look, if they haven't realized it, quote, 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 for many, many years, it ain't happening. Fuck them.
我慢だなんて、トシエさんにはいつもお世話になりっぱなしで。
The one person that actually shows us affection.
嬢ちゃん。
Like Jesus. Nothing about our household had changed in years. As always, our lifestyle was dependent on Toshi-san's quiet assistance. She took care of all of us without a single complaint. But I hadn't seen my grandparents show her gratitude for everything she did, not even once. Toshi-san's son, who lived with his wife in the neighborhood, clearly wanted to pry his mother away from her unrewarded servitude to the Kawamoto family. I'd overheard them having a heated fight on the topic. Our life was the same as it always had been, but beneath the surface it was slowly coming apart at the seams.
トシエさん、もう来てくれなくなるのかな。
One day I was making my way along a sloping road I had once walked with my mother, bombarded with the cries of cicadas. Oh, Jesus. The area around my grandparents' home was a district with strict regulations on the height and variety of buildings, so the scenery hadn't changed much at all in the years since my mother entered the hospital. It was picturesque in a way that seemed to appeal to rich people. Many city dwellers had their second houses nearby, but I could never come to enjoy the scenery. It left me cold. The things that mattered to me changed for the worst, but the things I hated, the things that left me cold, never seemed to go away. It's literally just worse and worse and worse. Driven by frustration, indistinct feelings of powerlessness, I began to walk faster. Ooh! But with a flinch of surprise, my legs suddenly came to a halt.
Yeah. Ohayo, Yumiko-chan.
I don't talk to reporters. Get away. I don't need no paparazzi.
学校に行くところ？歩きながらでいいからさ、ちょっとおじさんの話に付き合ってもらえないかな。
My mom told me not to talk. You know, yeah, right. She would have never taught me anything. Neither would this whole entire goddamn family. After that moment of hesitation, my legs began to move once more, faster than before. Striding along almost like a race walker, I hurried down the road leading to my school.
お父さんがね、最近またちょっとおじさんの耳に入ってくるようなことをやっててね。それで騒ぎになっているんだよ。
Sorry, buddy. Got no idea what my dad's up to. I've never even talked to him.
二宮さんって由美子ちゃんの知り合いにいなかった？ちょうどお母さんと同じぐらいの年の女の人なんだけど、もし知ってたら何でもいいんだ。おじさんに教えてくれないかな？
Oh, I don't like where this is going.
それと、これは由美子ちゃんの家のことなんだけど、お母さんが昔お父さんと一緒に暮らしてた時にお手伝いをしていた人の。
おじさん。
なんだい、由美子ちゃん。
Please leave. Coming to an abrupt halt, I turned to face the man.
前にも言いました。私何も言いません。質問にも答えません。
Damn. Alright, good job, Yumiko. You lay it on him.
Oh.
Lay it on him.
だから、こうやってまとわりつくのをやめてください。
いや、だからだね、由美子ちゃん。
I mean, you're harassing her for information she has no fucking idea about or what's going on, you know?
名前で慣れ慣れしく呼ぶのもやめてください。
Get wrecked, reporter man.
失礼します。
Annihilated.
やれやれ。父親譲りだな、ありゃ。
Well, there was one significant change in my stagnant life. A reporter from a gossip magazine whose job seemed to consist of digging for information on my father was making a habit of loitering around me. I had first met him during the winter of my first year in junior high. At the time, I was still comically naive. He approached me with kind words and sympathy, two things I wasn't used to getting, and convinced me to open up to him about my family circumstances. Pathetic as it was, I didn't realize it was all for an article until the moment my grandmother threw the tabloid in my face and delivered a furious scolding. Humiliated and bitter, I swore to myself to never again discuss personal matters with strangers, or to trust their compassion. Oh. And despite it all, the very same journalist had the nerve to show his face in front of me again. Every time something happened, he'd come around sniffing for scraps of information. Speaking with him felt like brushing against an enormous and particularly slimy leech. Oh, we don't talk about leeches, especially in flashbacks. I marched ahead as quickly as I could, one fierce step after another, trying to shake off the lingering residue of our encounter. But then again, the place I was hurrying to wasn't exactly pleasant in its own right.
駅前んとこのさ、ロータリーのとこでヤマッチいたんよ。声かけたらあいつ逃げやがってさ。
あいつ最近付き合い悪いよな。彼女できたのかな、やっぱし。
嘘。山地誰かと付き合ってんの？
I swear to God.
あれ知らんかった？ C 組の木本いいじゃん。あいつの。
Oh. What, so they just... Oh, so they just stop fucking talking as soon as I enter. Fuck these people. It would have been much easier if they simply treated me like I didn't exist. Their clumsy method of ignoring me could sometimes be a weapon as sharp as an insult. I was well past the point of letting each and every sudden silence weigh upon my mind, but it still wasn't exactly a pleasant feeling.
今日も来てんぞ、あれの子が。
How's about you go fuck yourself?
あいつ成績はいいけど母親はあれの病気で病院いるんだよな。
What do you mean by those diseases?
怖いよね。きっとあの子もさ、そういうのを。
Can we get when do we get my box cutter? Can I start stabbing? What if she's had that box cutter for like, what if she gets it soon and that's the same box cutter Mr. Stabby? The more I tried to ignore them, the more their whispers seemed to pierce their way into my ears. A year had passed since I'd first set foot in the school. By then, there wasn't a single person in my class who didn't know all about my family. There was no such thing as privacy in the countryside. The real nature of my mother's illness, which should have been kept absolutely confidential by the hospital, had filtered all the way down to a middle schooler's gossip. A purely academic question occurred to me. If this wasn't despair, then what exactly would qualify?
ここも逃げられない。
God, no matter where she goes, it's just, ugh. I opened my sketchbook beneath my desk, making sure that nobody could see. I'd kept at my art, and flipping through the book, it was obvious that my ability to depict fine details had come a long way in the last year. But all that really proved was how obsessively I'd sought escape. How deeply attached I'd grown from the world around me. Rather than pride, I felt something like nausea. Even my art was beginning to lose its value as a refuge. Oh god, it's just, oh no, the room was pure white. Nothing had changed here. Not the room, not even my mother's posture in their bed. It was as if I'd never left. Every time I walked in that door and saw her sitting there, I felt a surge of irresponsible pity run through me.
お母さん、来たわよ。
Ugh.
あ、ユミコ。いらっしゃい。
As always, I saw my mother in profile. As always, her gaze didn't turn to me. As always, she smiled quietly. As always, but there was no tenderness in that expression. She was simply moving her face into that shape. It was an empty imitation of a real smile.
本持ってきたから。
I lowered a small bundle of books and weekly magazines my mother had requested on the shelf beside her bed. They usually came in with the mail, but sometimes I happened to run into a nurse who would hand them over to me for a more personal delivery.
そう。ありがとう。
Of course, the weeklies in question were respectable, established publications that largely kept away from the scandals and rumors circulated by the tabloids. We couldn't take the risk of her reading something like that article I'd unwittingly contributed to the previous winter. It undoubtedly would have set back her treatment, which was already proceeding slowly enough. My mother's newfound reading habit seemed to be part of an attempt to learn more about my father and the company he's running. Looking at the thick pile of magazines and books, I felt my chest tighten as her obvious desperation. Mom had never known much about business. I would have been surprised if she could understand half of what she was reading.
ご飯残してるみたいね。看護師さんが言ってた。
Ugh,
そう。
there it is.
今度、トシエさんにご飯作ってきてもらうね。病院のよりはずっと美味しいと思うから。
Ugh.
そう。
Our interactions followed the same familiar pattern. I chattered away relentlessly, while my mother muttered vaguely. Lately, even those monosyllabic responses had grown repetitive and careless, almost as if she was beginning to treat the world with the same careless disinterest my father had shown her. It was a particularly difficult visit. My mother barely spoke, and I ran out of things to say fairly quickly. As for the hours I spent at school had grown increasingly suffocating, I was spending more and more time wandering around in search of quiet places where I could be alone. These days, I frequently found myself lacking for stories to
そ
tell.
ろそろ帰るわ。
I rose quietly from my seat. My mother's face, as always, didn't turn toward me. It had been a truly pathetic excuse for a conversation, and I had little hope tomorrow would be any better. You never know. The things I wanted to what? The things I wanted to stay? Jesus. The things I wanted to stay the same fell apart. There we go, brain. Thanks for working for once. The things I wanted to change stayed exactly as they were. Time no longer seemed to be flowing. It was a stagnant, brackish pool. And even treading water was becoming a
あ
struggle.
なたが
But as I'm prepared to leave, my mother spoke. That hadn't happened in quite some time.
お母さん
That one word came as a complete surprise. Was she about to say something? Despite it all, I found myself pausing expectantly, hoping for some positive sign. Thinking the matter over calmly, it was foolish to even imagine her mood had suddenly changed. But I was so starved for a glimmer of hope that my mind latched on to the most optimistic possible interpretation. And then, with a few simple words, my naive happy end scenario shattered like a fragile piece of glass it had always been.
あなたが
Yeah,
男の子だったら
there it
よかったの
is.
にね。
There it is. Fuck you too, I guess. My mother had never said anything like that before. No doubt that thought had crossed her mind, but so long as she had even a shred of rationality remaining, the words could never have passed her lips. Well, after all, if she were to say that, then nothing could ever change except to fall apart.
なんでそうじゃなかったのかな。
Well, see, genetics and the like. I mean, Yumiko can't help what she is. Something slipped out of my hands and clattered to the floor. A visitor from the company had dropped off a few jelly desserts. I'd been taking one from the shelf with a spoon. My mother had been skipping her meals lately, but I thought she might at least manage to eat that. Considering the season, a white peach jelly seemed appropriate. Maybe it would have been easier for her to hold with a spoon with a flat handle. Moments before, those were the only thoughts in my mind. They were gone now, obliterated by my mother's words, so completely that it was as if they had never existed. Dude, I can't take this. I ran as fast as I could, pushing my heart so hard I thought it might just sputter to a stop. Down the slope in front of the hospital, up again, onto a large, curving detour, past the station, around the corner from a small cleaning store, into the remains of an old, abandoned factory. Only then, absolutely confident that I was alone, did I finally come to a halt. Gasping for air, I doubled over and held my trembling legs with both hands, propping up a body that seemed ready to collapse. The world flickered before my oxygen-starved eyes. My peripheral vision was dim, clouded, as though I was peering out from inside a tunnel. I could feel sweat pouring out from all over my body. My hair and clothes were completely disheveled. I'd fallen at some point on the way over. There were scrapes on my knee and elbow. I pushed myself erect and a tattered mess of a girl. But I couldn't have cared less about any of that. After all, the tears streaming uncontrollably down my face were far more blatantly pathetic than my beat-up clothing. Nothing. You're perfect the way you are. I could have endured it if she complained about something I could fix. I could have behaved better. There was still room for my grades to improve. I could have made myself more presentable. I could have cut every strand of hair to the exact same length. I could have learned to walk in a refined way at an absolutely steady pace. But no matter what, I was powerless to undo the reality of my own birth. Why did she have to choose the one thing I could never, ever change? My grandparents were right back then. If it was possible, she should have just tried again. She should have crushed the egg in the womb and pretended it never happened. Better than this hopelessness, this irreparably broken life. Placing my hands against my breasts, I pushed down with all my strength. Oh, stop. How could a thing so totally beyond my control bring me such misery? Stop it! I felt the dull, throbbing pain deep inside my chest. Yeah, because you're fucking hurting yourself now. The painful pressure was accompanied by a slight twinge of stimulation. Even as I rejected it, my body reminded me that I was in fact female. There was pain, but at the same time, I could feel the blood throughout my body beginning to stir in an unfamiliar way. Instinctively, I knew it was something sexual, and I shivered with pure loathing. I hated my body. I hated the woman it was becoming. I didn't ask for that misery. I had no say in my crime. It was born with me. But so long as I lived, the pain would always be lurking somewhere deep inside me. If only you'd been a boy. With one phrase, anyone could reduce me to nothing. I could study all I wanted. I could be the sweetest, most well-behaved person in the world. But so long as I stayed in that body, my naked vulnerability would never go away. I opened my bag and took out my pencil box. Flipping open the lid, I retrieved the box cutter. Whoa! Oh, don't even start. Don't you even, Yumiko. I'm gonna be really upset with you. I used as a makeshift sharpener for my colored pencils. I wonder when exactly I began to find the act of cutting things apart pleasant. Oh, don't even, Yumiko. The clicking of the blade emerging from its sheath, the sound of something once whole being severed apart. Those had become calming sounds to me. Not to me! Oh, stop it, Yumiko! How wonderful would it be if I could slice away my femininity with a single box cutter? Not happening! Stop it! How wonderful would it be if I could sever my fate with the touch of a blade? Okay, you can stop now. How wonderful would it be if one movement of my hands could cut me free for all the troubles that coiled around me and choked the air from my lungs. Yumiko, Jesus, as I cut savagely through the long identical bundles of black, such thoughts ran through my head one after another. Yumiko, you can't change. On the boiling concrete, speckled with the remnants of faded paint, clumps of black gathered. They fell like a vile rain until the sun-heated ground was covered in them. I could feel the gloom in my heart fading as I looked down into the darkness. But in its place, that dirty blackness left a layer of filth inside me that could never be cleaned away. Can I not?
バカマジ違ってそれ
You've got it all wrong. Go fucking... Can I just... I am physically hurting from how, yeah, listen, eating people's one thing, but, no love? Ever? Or affection? From anything? Oh, that hurts me. At least we could deal with eating people. I mean, I guess that's something.